The message arrived on a Tuesday morning when Maya-chan was teaching her usual yoga class in Vancouver. She had just finished helping an elderly woman with her downward dog pose when her phone buzzed. With 17 missed calls from numbers she did not recognize by the time she checked her messages, the news had already spread across every screen on Earth. The Galactic Combat Trials had finally agreed to accept a human competitor after decades of diplomatic pressure from Earth's representatives, but there was a catch. The Alien Council had decided that humans could not choose their own champion. Instead, they would select Earth's representative through a random lottery using the Global Citizen database out of 8 billion people on the planet. The computer had selected Maya-chan. She was 34 years old and worked as a physical therapist at a small clinic downtown. She had no military training and no fighting experience beyond a self-defense class she took in college. Her greatest athletic achievement was completing an Ironman triathlon 3 years ago, which she had done mostly to prove to herself that she could. Aliens had not chosen her because she was special. They had chosen her because she was ordinary. Maya understood this within hours of the announcement. The Galactic Combat Trials were the most prestigious fighting competition in the known universe. Species from across 400 worlds sent their greatest warriors to compete for glory and the honor of their entire civilization. The trials had existed for over 1,000 years, and humans had begged to participate ever since first contact. Now the aliens had finally said yes, but they had made sure to rig the selection. They wanted humanity to fail. They wanted to show the galaxy that these soft pink creatures from the small blue planet were not worthy of respect. Maya sat in her apartment that night and watched the alien news broadcast that Earth's satellites had learned to intercept and translate. The commentators laughed when they showed her picture. They compared her physical statistics to the other competitors, and the numbers were not kind. The Vorthax champion stood 8 feet tall and weighed 600 pounds of pure muscle. He had killed 17 opponents in sanctioned matches and wounded dozens more. The Krellian representative could lift a ground transport vehicle over her head, and her species felt almost no pain. The insectoid Chitrani had an exoskeleton that could withstand plasma fire and 4 arms that moved faster than human eyes could track. Maya Chun could do a very good plank pose and once ran 26 miles without stopping. The contrast was so absurd that most alien viewers treated it as comedy. Earth's governments immediately began working on a way to refuse the selection. Diplomats argued that the lottery was unfair and that Maya should be allowed to decline. But the Alien Council had been clear: if humanity refused to send their selected champion, they would never be invited to participate again. The message was obvious: send your random nobody and watch her die, or admit that humans are too afraid to compete. Maya received calls from generals and presidents and prime ministers. They all said the same thing. In different ways, they told her she did not have to do this. They told her that no one would blame her for saying no. They told her that Earth would find another way to earn respect in the galactic community. But Maya had spent her whole career helping broken people put themselves back together. She had watched patients with shattered spines learn to walk again through nothing but determination and time. She knew something about the human spirit that the aliens did not. She said yes. The training began. Immediately, Earth's military assembled the best fighters and coaches and strategists they could find. They studied footage from previous trials and analyzed the fighting styles of every species. They built simulations and training programs designed to give Maya even the smallest chance of survival. That everyone knew the truth: she was not being trained to win, she was being trained to last long enough that humanity would not be completely humiliated. Maya trained for 6 months. She learned to take hits that would break normal people. She studied anatomy and found the weak points that every species tried to hide. She ran until her legs gave out, and then she ran some more. The coaches were impressed by her determination, but worried about her chances. One Night after a particularly brutal training session, an old retired soldier sat down next to her. He had fought in 3 wars and killed more men than he could count. He looked at Maya with tired eyes and asked her why she was really doing this. Maya thought about the question for a long time. She told him about her grandfather, who had survived a prison camp during a war that happened before she was born. He had weighed 80 pounds when they freed him, and the doctors said he should have died months earlier, but he lived another 40 years and raised a family and never once complained about his suffering. Her grandfather used to say that humans were not the strongest or the fastest creatures on Earth, but they were the most stubborn. They were the creatures that kept going when everything else gave up. They were the monsters that followed their prey across continents until it dropped dead from exhaustion. Maya told the old soldier that she was not going to the trials to win. She was going to show the galaxy what humans were made of. The soldier nodded slowly and said nothing else, but the next day he started training her himself. When the ship came to take Maya to the orbital arena station, she brought only a small bag. Her parents stood at the launch pad with tears in their eyes. Her mother begged her one last time to stay. Her father just held her hand and told her he was proud. Maya hugged them both and promised she would come home. She did not promise she would come home in one piece. The journey to the station took 3 weeks. Maya spent most of it exercising in the small quarters they gave her and watching more footage of her opponents. When the ship finally docked, she stepped out into the largest structure she had ever seen. The arena station was a massive ring that orbited a dead planet. It could hold millions of spectators, and the architecture was designed to make visitors feel small. Maya walked through corridors filled with aliens who towered over her. Some had scales, and some had fur, and some had skin that looked like liquid metal. They all looked at her with the same expression. It was not hatred or fear or even curiosity. It was pity. The other competitors did not bother to threaten her during the welcome ceremony. The Vorthax champion looked through her like she was made of glass. The Krellian representative did not even acknowledge her presence. They had already decided she was dead. Maya found her assigned quarters and unpacked her small bag. Then she asked a passing official where she could find a gym. The official seemed confused by the question, but gave her directions. Maya thanked him politely and walked away. She had work to do. The ceremonial weigh-in was broadcast across 400 worlds to an audience of over 50 billion viewers. Every species in the galactic community tuned in to watch their champions step onto the platform and receive their formal introductions. Event was hosted by Rex Talmorn, who was considered the greatest commentator in the history of the trials. He was a massive reptilian creature with scales the color of burnished copper and a voice that could shake stadium walls. Rex had competed in the trials himself 7 times and won 5 of those competitions. His knowledge of combat was unmatched, and his opinions shaped how the entire galaxy viewed the sport. When he praised a fighter, that fighter became a legend. When he dismissed someone, they were forgotten before the first round began. The weigh-in took place in the central arena, which could seat 3 million spectators. Every seat was filled with aliens of every shape and size. They cheered and roared as each competitor walked onto the stage. The Vorthax champion entered first, and the crowd erupted. His name was Grathkel, and he moved like a predator, even when he was simply walking. Rex introduced him with words that dripped with respect. He called him unstoppable and undefeated, and a predator without equal. Grathkel raised his massive fists, and the audience screamed their approval. Next came the Krellian representative, whose name was Thesivorn. Stood 3 meters tall, and her body was covered in natural armor plating. Rex called her 3 meters of pure killing intent, and the crowd agreed. The insectoid Chitrani skittered onto the stage with movements that seemed impossible for something so large. Rex praised its exoskeleton and its speed and its complete lack of mercy. One by one, the champions of a dozen worlds received their introductions. Each one was described as a perfect warrior and a credit to their species. The crowd treated every entrance like a religious experience then. It was time for the human Maya. Walked onto the stage wearing simple training clothes. She was the smallest competitor by far, and she looked even smaller surrounded by the massive alien architecture. The stadium fell into an uncomfortable silence as she approached the platform. Rex Talmorin looked down at his notes and then looked at Maya with an expression that mixed confusion with contempt. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the warmth he had shown the other competitors. He scoffed her name like it was a joke he did. "Not find funny, Maya-chan," he said with obvious disdain in his translated words. Human, their first and likely last entry into these sacred trials. He paused and made a sound that the translator interpreted as dismissive laughter. "I am told she helps injured people stretch for a living." He shook his massive head, and the crowd began to murmur, "Let users hope the medical bay is fully prepared for what comes next." The audience did not cheer. They did not boo. They simply went quiet in a way that felt heavier than any noise could have been. Maya stood on the platform and felt the weight of their silence pressing down on her. It was not the silence of respect or anticipation. It was the silence of pity. It was the silence of millions of beings who were watching. A small creature walked to its death. Some of them looked away because they could not bear to watch. Others stared with morbid curiosity, wondering how quickly she would fall. Maya looked up at the stadium and saw her parents sitting in a special section reserved for competitor families. Her mother was crying. Her father was holding her mother's hand, and his face was pale. They had begged her not to come. They had told her that there was no shame in refusing, but Maya had made her choice, and now she had to live with it or die with it. She turned to face her first opponent, who happened to be the Chitrani champion. The insectoid creature regarded her with compound eyes that showed no emotion. Its forearms twitched with barely contained energy. Its mandibles clicked together in what might have been anticipation or hunger. Maya did something that no competitor had done in the 1,000-year history of the galactic combat trials. She bowed. It was a simple bow from the waist with her hands at her sides. The kind of bow her grandfather had taught her when she was a little girl, a bow that showed respect for an opponent, regardless of how the fight would end. The Chitrani did not know how to respond. Its species had no equivalent gesture, and for a moment, it simply stood there confused. The crowd murmured again, and Rex Talmorin made a comment about primitive human customs. But Maya did not care what they thought. She had been raised to show respect even to those who showed her none. The weigh-in concluded, and the competitors were escorted back to their quarters. Maya walked through corridors filled with aliens who whispered as she passed. She heard fragments of their conversations through the translator in her ear. They were taking bets on how long she would survive. The most optimistic guesses gave her 30 seconds. Some thought she would die before she could even raise her hands. Maya kept walking and kept her face calm inside. Her chest, her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, but she had learned long ago that fear was just a feeling. It could not stop her unless she let it. That night she sat alone in her quarters and watched footage of the Chitrani champion. She studied its movements and its attack patterns and its weaknesses. There were not many weaknesses to find. The creature was fast and strong and covered in armor that could stop bullets. Its forearms could attack from multiple angles at once. Its mandibles were sharp enough to cut through metal. Maya watched the footage over and over until her eyes burned. Then she closed her eyes and visualized the fight in her mind. She saw herself dodging and weaving and staying just out of reach. Saw herself lasting longer than anyone expected. She did not see herself winning because that was not the goal. The goal was to survive. The goal was to show the galaxy that humans did not break easily. The goal was to make them remember her name. Even if they had scoffed at it, Maya opened her eyes and looked at herself in the mirror. She saw a small woman with tired eyes and bruises from 6 months of training. She saw someone who had no business being in this competition. But she also saw her grandfather looking back at her. She saw every human who had ever refused to give up when the odds were impossible. She saw something that the aliens had never learned to recognize. She saw stubbornness, pure relentless, unstoppable stubbornness. Maya smiled at her reflection and whispered 3 words. Tomorrow we begin. Then she lay down on her bed and forced herself to sleep. She would need every bit of rest she could get. The first round was only hours away. The arena floor was made of a material that could repair itself between matches. This was necessary because most fights left the surface cracked and stained with blood. Maya walked onto that floor for her first match and felt the eyes of the galaxy watching her every step. The Chitrani champion was already waiting in the center of the arena. It stood perfectly still like a statue made of black chitin and sharp edges. Its compound eyes tracked Maya as she approached, and its mandibles clicked with hungry anticipation. The referee was a floating drone that announced the rules in 17 languages. No weapons beyond natural body parts. No attacks after a competitor surrendered. Death was permitted but not required. Maya listened to the rules and nodded even though she had memorized them weeks ago. The drone floated to the edge of the arena and began the countdown. When it reached 0, the Chitrani exploded into motion. It was faster than anything Maya had ever seen. Its 4 arms swung at her from different angles, and each strike could have torn her in half. Maya did not try to block. She did not try to counter. She simply was not there when the attacks arrived. She ducked under the first swing and rolled away from the second. She twisted her body sideways to avoid the third and jumped back from the fourth. The Chitrani pressed forward with relentless aggression, and Maya kept retreating. The crowd began to murmur. This was not how fights in the trials usually went. Competitors were supposed to meet force with force. They were supposed to clash and struggle and prove their strength. Maya was doing none of those things. She was just running away. Rex Talmoran's commentary was dismissive. The human appears to have chosen survival over dignity. He cited a common strategy for prey animals. But Maya was not simply running. She was watching. Every time the Chitrani attacked, she learned something new about how it moved. She noticed that its upper right arm was slightly slower than the others. She saw that it paused for half a second after every combination to reset its balance. She observed that its compound eyes had difficulty tracking lateral movement. Maya stored this information in her mind and kept dodging. The Chitrani grew frustrated. It had never faced an opponent who refused to engage. Its attacks became wilder and more aggressive. It started making mistakes. 5 minutes into the fight, the Chitrani overextended on a strike, and Maya saw her opening. She did not attack. Not yet. She filed weakness away and kept moving. 10 minutes passed, and the crowd's murmurs became confused chatter. No competitor had ever lasted this long against the Chitrani champion. Maya was bleeding from a dozen small cuts where attacks had grazed her skin, but she was still standing. She was still moving. Rex Talmoran had stopped making jokes. His commentary became analytical as he tried to understand what he was seeing. She is not fighting, he observed. She is studying. The Chitrani seemed to reach the same conclusion. It stopped its wild attacks and became more cautious. It began to circle Maya instead of charging directly at her. This was exactly what Maya had been waiting for. Patience. Her grandfather had taught her that patience was the most powerful weapon a human could possess. Other creatures attacked when they were angry or hungry or afraid. Humans could wait. They could wait for hours or days or weeks. They could follow their prey across entire continents until it collapsed from exhaustion. Maya waited. The Chitrani circled. 20 minutes into the fight, the Chitrani made its move. It launched itself at Maya with all 4 arms extended in a killing embrace. Maya dropped to the ground and let the creature sail over her as it passed. She reached up and grabbed one of its legs. The Chitrani crashed to the arena floor, and Maya was on it immediately. She wrapped her arms around one of its leg joints and squeezed. Creature thrashed and tried to shake her off, but Maya held on. She had studied the Chitrani anatomy for weeks. She knew that the joints between their armor plates were vulnerable. She knew that enough pressure applied to the right spot could cause excruciating pain. Chitrani screamed. It was a sound that no translator could properly convey, a sound of rage and confusion, and something that might have been feared rolled and twisted and slammed Maya against the arena floor. She felt ribs crack under the impact, but she did not let go. She squeezed harder. The crowd had fallen completely silent. They were watching something they had never seen before. A soft, fragile human was hurting a creature that was supposed to be invincible. The Chitrani managed to throw Maya off, but the damage was done. It stood on 3 legs now, because the 4th was hanging at an unnatural angle. Maya stood up slowly. Blood dripped from her mouth, and her left arm was not working properly, but she was still standing. She bowed to the Chitrani again. The creature hesitated. For the first time in its fighting career, it did not know what to do. It had been trained to overwhelm opponents with speed and strength. One had ever taught it how to fight something that refused to stay down. The fight continued for another hour. Maya could not land many attacks, but every one she landed counted. She targeted the joints and the soft tissue between armor plates. She used her small size to get into positions where the Chitrani could not effectively strike her. The creature hit her dozens of times, and each hit felt like being struck by a vehicle. Maya kept getting up. Eventually, the Chitrani stopped getting up. It lay on the arena floor with its legs bent at wrong angles. Its breathing was labored, and its compound eyes had lost their focus. The referee drone floated down and began the count. The Chitrani did not move. When the count reached 10, the drone announced Maya-chan as the winner. Crowd did not cheer. They did not know how to react. They had just watched the impossible happen. Maya bowed one more time to her fallen opponent. Then she walked off the arena floor under her own power. She made it exactly 12 steps into the corridor before she collapsed. The medical team rushed to help her and found 14 broken bones. They found internal bleeding and a concussion and damage that would take weeks to heal, but Maya was smiling. She had won, and somewhere in the galaxy, 50 billion viewers were trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Rex Talmorn sat in his commentary booth and said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Something strange happened today. He said, "I am not sure what it means, but I think we should pay attention." The medical bay on the station was equipped with technology that could regrow limbs and repair organ damage in hours. The doctors offered Maya their most advanced treatments, but she refused most of them. She accepted only the basic care needed to keep her alive. The doctors were confused by her decision. They told her that full regeneration would give her a much better chance in the next round. Maya shook her head and explained her reasoning. If she healed too quickly, the other species would say she cheated. They would claim that human technology was responsible for her victory. She wanted them to see her walk into every fight looking exactly like what she was, broken and bruised and completely human. The doctors exchanged glances but respected her wishes. They patched her wounds and set her bones with traditional methods. When Maya left the medical bay 2 days later, she looked like someone who had barely survived a war, because that was exactly what she was. Her second-round opponent was a creature called a Drelkai. They were an amphibious species from a water world that had evolved to hunt for days without rest. Drelkai champion had gills that could extract oxygen from both air and water. It had webbed hands that could crush stone and a tail that could shatter bones. Most importantly, it had endurance that was legendary even among the species of the trials. The Drelkai were known as the marathoners of the galaxy. Maya smiled when she heard who she would be fighting. The match began in an arena that had been modified with shallow pools of water. This was standard for Drelkai fights since they performed better in wet environments. Maya walked through the ankle-deep water and faced her opponent. The Drelkai looked at her with large dark eyes that held no expression. It did not attack immediately. It had watched her first fight and learned from the Chitrani's mistakes. Instead of charging forward, it began to circle. Maya circled with it. Crowd settled in for what they expected to be a slow, methodical match. They had no idea how right they were. The fight lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of circling and probing and occasional exchanges of blows. 4 hours of two competitors testing each other and looking for weaknesses. The Drelkai landed dozens of hits on Maya, and each one drove her to her knees. But she always stood back up. She always kept moving. She always kept watching. The Drelkai began to grow tired. This should not have been possible. Its species could hunt for days without stopping, but something about this fight was different. It was not just physical exertion that was draining the creature. It was mental exhaustion. Every time the Drelkai thought it had, Maya figured out she did something unexpected. Every time it landed what should have been a finishing blow, she refused to stay down. The creature had never encountered anything like this. Its instincts told it that the prey should be dead by now. Its experience told it that smaller, weaker opponents always gave up eventually, but Maya was not giving up. She was not even slowing down. 5 hours into the fight, the Drelkai's gills began to strain. The arena air was much drier than its home world atmosphere. Under normal circumstances, this would not have been a problem, but normal circumstances did not include fighting a human who simply would not stop. 6 hours in the Drelkai could barely lift its arms. Its tail dragged on the ground, and its eyes had lost their focus. Maya was in terrible shape herself. She had dislocated her shoulder in the 3rd hour and popped it back in herself. She was bleeding from wounds that the medical staff would later describe as horrifying, but she was still standing. Drelkai was not. It lay in the shallow water and looked up at Maya with something that might have been confusion in its language. It asked her a question that the translator converted to simple words. "Why do you not stop?" Maya knelt beside the fallen creature and answered honestly, "Stopping is not something we know how to do." The Drelkai closed its eyes, and the referee drone began its count. Before the count reached 5, the creature raised one webbed hand. It was the gesture of surrender in its culture. The crowd exploded not with cheers or boos, but with confused shouting. A Drelkai had never surrendered in the history of the trials. They were supposed to fight until they could not move. They were supposed to die before admitting defeat. But this one had chosen to surrender rather than continue fighting a human. Maya helped the creature to its feet. It was something that competitors never did for each other. Drelkai looked at her with those dark, expressionless eyes and said something that the translator struggled to convey. "You are wrong. Your body should have stopped long ago. There is something broken in your species." Maya smiled through her bloody lips. "We know," she said. "We have always known." After the second match, Maya became a different kind of story. The alien news networks stopped treating her as a joke and started treating her as a mystery. Scientists from a dozen worlds published papers theorizing about human physiology. How could such a fragile species produce individuals capable of such sustained effort? The answer came from Earth's own scientists, who were happy to explain. They talked about persistence hunting and how human ancestors had chased prey across African plains until the animals died of exhaustion. They talked about endurance running and ultramarathons, where humans covered distances that would kill most other Earth creatures. They talked about the unique combination of sweat glands and bipedal locomotion and mental stubbornness that made humans the scariest predators their planet had ever produced. A new term entered the galactic vocabulary: persistence predator. It was translated into 1,000 languages and taught in military academies across the spiral arm. The lesson was simple but terrifying. Humans were not dangerous because they were strong. They were dangerous because they did not stop. Maya's third-round opponent was the Vorthax champion Grath Kell, killer of 17, the most feared warrior in the trials. Had watched Maya's previous fights, and he was not impressed. She was slow and weak, and her victories were flukes. He would crush her in minutes. That was what he told the reporters before the match. That was what he believed. He was wrong. The semifinal against Grathkel lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of the most brutal combat the trials had ever seen. The Vorthax champion was everything the stories said he was. He was fast and strong, and his tactical mind was unmatched. His claws could shred steel, and his hide could turn away blades. He hit Maya so many times that the medical staff later counted 47 separate impacts that should have been fatal, but Maya refused to die. She refused to fall. She refused to do anything except keep moving. For War, Grathkel broke her arm in the first hour. She switched to fighting with one arm. He cracked her skull in the third hour. She kept her eyes open through sheer willpower. He shattered her knee in the fifth hour. She stood on one leg and kept swinging by. The sixth hour, Grathkel was not fighting anymore. He was just trying to understand. This creature should have been dead a dozen times over. Every blow he landed should have ended the match. But she kept coming. She kept looking at him with those strange human eyes that held no fear, only patience, only the absolute certainty that she would not stop. Grathkel finally fell, not from any single blow, but from something deeper. His spirit broke. He had been raised to believe that the strongest warrior, always one. He had built his entire identity on being the most powerful creature in any room. But Maya was not fighting with power. She was fighting with something he had never encountered, something that his people had no word for. Closest translation was spite, pure stubborn spite against the universe itself. When Grathkel collapsed to the arena floor, he was not unconscious. He was not even badly injured. He simply could not make himself stand up again. His mind had surrendered, even if his body had not. Maya stood over him, swaying on her broken leg. Blood dripped from wounds that covered her entire body. She looked like a corpse that had forgotten to stop moving, but she was still standing, and he was not. The crowd did not make a sound when the referee drone declared Maya the winner. They sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Said Rex Talmorn's voice cracked when he spoke. "I have commentated these trials for 40 cycles. He said, I have never seen anything like this. I do not know what this human is, but I know I will never forget her." The final was scheduled for 3 days later to allow for recovery. Maya spent most of that time in the medical bay, refusing treatment again. Her team begged her to accept at least some regeneration. Her injuries were so severe that the doctors were amazed she was still alive. But Maya was stubborn. She wanted the galaxy to see exactly what she was, a broken human who would not stop her opponent in the final. Was Kethvorit was not a creature in the normal sense. It was a silicon-based life form that had existed for over 10,000 years. Its body was made of living crystal that could reshape itself at will. It did not tire. It did not bleed. It did not feel pain in any way that biological creatures understood. Kithvio had never lost a match in any competition anywhere ever. The odds makers calculated Maya's chances of survival at 0.003%. On the day of the final, Maya walked to the arena one painful step at a time. She was wrapped in bandages, and her skin was more bruised than flesh. Every breath hurt, and every movement sent fire through her broken bones. But she walked under her own power. She would not let them carry her. The stadium was packed with more spectators than any final in history. Beings from 400 worlds had traveled to watch this match in person. They were not there to see Kethvorit win. Everyone knew Kethvorit would win. They were there to see the human they wanted to understand what they had been watching. They wanted to see how far this broken creature would go before she finally stopped. Maya stepped onto the arena floor and faced Kethvorit. Ancient being towered over her like a mountain made of crystal. It regarded her with senses that humans could not comprehend. When it spoke, its voice resonated through the arena like music made of mathematics. "You cannot hurt me," it said. "You cannot outlast me. I am eternal." Maya looked up at the creature and smiled. It hurt to smile. Everything hurt, but she smiled anyway. "Maybe," she said, "but I'm not here to beat HFY or." Seemed genuinely curious. Then why are you here? Maya looked at the crowd. She looked at the billions watching across the galaxy. She looked at her parents, who were crying in their seats. She looked at the commentator, who had scoffed her name. She thought about her grandfather and all the humans who had come before her. She thought about every time her species had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. I am here to show them what we are, she said. The bell rang. Maya raised her fists and walked forward. Fight lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of Maya attacking a being that could not be harmed by anything she did. 9 hours of Kethvir hitting her with blows that would have killed any other competitor instantly. 9 hours of a human refusing to accept reality. She did not win, of course. Its VOR was as eternal as it claimed, but it took 9 hours before Maya's body finally gave out, not from any killing blow, just from accumulated damage that eventually became too much. Even then, she did not fall. She simply stopped moving. Her muscles stopped responding to her commands. Her body had reached its absolute limit, but she was still standing when they carried her off the arena floor. Kithvarar watched her go and spoke for the first time after a victory. I have fought 1,000 species. It said, I have never been afraid before. Maya woke up in the medical bay 3 days later. She was told that she had lost. She smiled and said she knew. She was told that Earth was celebrating her as a hero. She asked if she could talk to her parents. She was told that the Galactic combat trials had changed their rules. Humans would now be allowed to send trained competitors of their own choosing. Every other species had quietly requested that they not. Maya laughed at that. It hurt to laugh, but she did it anyway. When she finally returned to Earth, she was greeted by crowds that stretched for miles. People cheered her name and called her the greatest champion humanity had ever produced. She told them she was just a yoga teacher from Vancouver. She told them she had only done what any human would do. She told them that the real heroes were still out there living their ordinary lives. But the galaxy did not forget what it had learned. In military academies across the spiral arm, a new lesson was taught. Never corner a human. Never assume they will stop. Never believe you have broken them, because humans do not fight to win. They fight until the universe itself gets tired of watching. And in the end, that is more terrifying than any strength or speed or natural weapon. That is the persistence of a species that crossed continents chasing prey. That is the stubbornness of creatures who survived ice ages and plagues and wars. That is what the commentator failed to understand when he scoffed her name. Maya Chen was not a warrior. She was something far more dangerous. She was human, and humans do not stop.